welcome Danny Saathoff.
So I've rather lazily, I'm a lazy artist. I've mentioned this a couple of times today talking with students. I've very lazily titled the talk the same title as the show down in the gallery, Trajectory Shift. And you know, titles have meanings, and this is no different. They should have meanings anyway. And some are more obvious than others, and so I thought that this one maybe needed a little bit of explanation. So I'm going to spend the first few minutes here just kind of explaining the idea behind trajectory shift. So, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, and I have longer hindsights than some of you in the room, maybe not as long as everybody in the room, but, you know, we can always look back on our lives and we can kind of see these moments in time where the trajectory of our lives, where the trajectory of our careers, where the trajectory of our work takes a turn. And sometimes these are like little moments that just take us and nudge us in a new direction. Sometimes they're like a big bomb that drops on us and we have no choice but to kind of go in a different direction. The type of trajectory shift that I'm talking about, though, is these moments in time where you're given a choice as to whether to follow a new path or not. And that can take you into a whole new area of your career or your life or the work that you create. So I'm feeling very nostalgic today because, you know, coming back to Stout where it all began for me. I'm going to take you back to my time here at Stout just for a moment. I graduated high school in 1989, and between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, I worked for a guy. Back then he would have called himself a commercial artist. This was before computers took over the world, and he hand lettered everything. So he was a sign painter, but he did a lot of advertising, a lot of sign painting, but it was all hand lettered. And so he worked with a lettering brush, a quill, and sign paint, and he was so much fun to watch. He was a family friend, and he took me under his wing and gave me a job for that summer and then the subsequent summers through my college years. And he was a major influence on me coming to Stout, and I started my first 2 years here, freshman and sophomore year, as a graphic design major, and he was a direct influence on that decision. Between my sophomore year and my junior year, I took a year off, and I moved to Colorado for the first time. I was a skier, and I wanted to just spend a season in the mountains. And so I did that, and upon coming back to Stout, I decided to change my major to studio art, not the trajectory shift. Kind of a planned event. But I changed my major to studio art because I took a metalsmithing class as a sophomore, and I fell in love with it. And so that felt like a way for me to you know, see myself as a working artist and feasibly make something that it was a saleable product that I could see myself making a living doing. So I changed my major to studio art. Upon graduating, I graduated with metalsmithing emphasis and printmaking emphasis, a dual emphasis. Haven't made a print since. My apologies to the printmakers in the room. But I proceeded to move directly back out to Colorado once I graduated. And I actually got a job working for a metalsmith out there. I was working in his studio, but he also had a gallery in Breckenridge, Colorado. And so I was making his designs, and you know, he was selling those pieces. You know, we're working in the studio together. He was selling the work in his gallery. And so here I am feeling really good about myself. You know, I'm living in the place that I want to live, doing the work that I wanted to do. I was using my degree. Not all of my friends were doing that. So, you know, I was like patting myself on the back. I'm really on track. The thing that I realized, though, real quick, is that nobody moves to the mountains to work. And that was my boss. People that employ other people in the mountains, they're no different. And my boss had this rule. He said, if it snows more than 6 inches, don't come to work. Because he was going skiing, and that gave me the freedom to do the same, which I thought was really great. I mean, if you're a skier, skiing powder, there's nothing like it. But I found out real quick that the year that I moved out to Colorado, that I moved back out to Colorado, was a record-breaking snowfall year. And this is one of many storms, and that is my car. This is how they plow the roads in Colorado in storms like that. So we got to ski a lot. I didn't work very much though, so I had a real hard time making money. And so I ended up falling into this very stereotypical ski bum kind of trap, taking all kinds of odd jobs. I worked on the mountain for a little while. I was a snowmobile tour guide for 3 years. That's not a career, but it was a lot of fun. I worked construction in the summers, as Masako said. And so after a few years of just kind of floating like this, I decided to start my own business because I figured if I wasn't making money, if I wasn't going to make money in the mountains, I was going to not make money on my own terms. So I started my own business because what do you have to lose? And so I fell back on my sign making roots. And so I started a sign shop. And the guy that I painted signs for, he gave me this little tidbit of advice. He said, if you can learn to hand letter with a brush and paint, you'll never starve. And he was right, because I started this business and I started making a little money. And now computers are starting to become a thing. And I bought my first computer system. And I bought my first vinyl plotter so I could cut vinyl graphics and vinyl lettering, and that made me more efficient, so I was making more money. There's all the things that you're supposed to do as a business owner. The interesting thing was that, again, computers are just kind of becoming, not everybody had a personal computer, but I did. And I had graphic design software. And once business owners found out that I had, a computer, and they just automatically assume I'm a graphic designer. So now I start getting graphic design jobs. So I had a little graphic design business. I was designing logos, signage packages, identity packages for businesses. I was a hack, but it was making me money, and I was able to buy my first house. I sold that house, and I built a house. And so 4 years of running this business, kind of growing this business, felt pretty good. And I was, it wasn't what I went to school for necessarily, but I was happy. And I thought that this was where I was going to be for the rest of my life. This was the work I was going to be doing. So one day I'm working outside, and it's summer in the mountains. It's beautiful. And I don't know, I was hanging a sign or applying graphics to a window or something. I don't remember. But a friend of mine walked by, and he said, hey, I'm going sailing. Do you want to go? And I didn't even know he had a boat. And I was a lot of things. I was a business owner. I was a skier. I was a mountain biker, fly fisherman, whitewater kayaker, backpacker. I did all the things that you do in the mountains. Sailing wasn't even on my radar. But 2 weeks later, I bought my first sailboat. Something resonated with me that day that I've never felt anything like this. All of those other things that I was so interested in, skiing, mountain biking, blah, 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 completely fell by the wayside. And sailing became my new addiction, this new passion of mine. And so I learned to sail that boat that summer. And the following spring, I made the decision to move back to Minneapolis, where I could bring that crappy little sailboat that I bought. And I wanted to sail bigger water. And for a Midwestern kid, I grew up in the Midwest here. Big water is Lake Superior. And I became infatuated with this idea of sailing on Lake Superior. So I sold my house, I sold my business, and I moved back to the Midwest to do this. This is the trajectory shift that has changed my entire life. A couple of things did happen about the same time. The fall, the September after I learned to sail and I bought that sailboat, 9/11 happened, which was just, it's an event that just rocked everybody and made us all kind of rethink priorities. A month and a half later, my grandmother died, first of my 4 grandparents. And so, there were events that were kind of all culminating and making me think that, well, maybe living 1,000 miles away from family, I didn't get home for the funeral for my grandmother, that bothered me. And I thought maybe I need to rethink my priorities. But the sailboat, you couple those two things, those two bombs that drop, and then you add the sailboat in. I know it's silly. You add this sailboat, this addiction and obsession to sailing, and it all made sense. Sell everything and move back and go sailing on Lake Superior. And so I did that. It's exactly what I did. The other thing that was kind of happening at the same time is that, while I was doing creative work with the sign shop and the graphic design, hack graphic design, it was creative work but it wasn't what I moved to the mountains to do. You know, of course, I wanted to do the other things that the mountains afford, but you know, I wanted to be a metalsmith, and I never really let that career get off the ground. So I decided this is a good time to do like a hard reset on my life and move back and give it a try. I was young enough that I could kind of do this kind of switching gears. And I was fairly untethered. So I moved back. I moved to Minneapolis, got a crappy little apartment in Loring Park, and set up my jeweler's bench for the first time in like 6 years. I hadn't made a piece of jewelry in that amount of time. Set my jeweler's bench up in the corner, and I got to work. And I had a little bit of money in my pocket from selling my house, so I could float just a little bit. And so I started working on this body of jewelry that I've got 4 images here from that very first body of work that I was creating. These are from slides, by the way. These pictures, these images, a lot of these images are crap, but because we did slides back then. And to your question, what year was this? This is 2002 that I moved back. So just after 9/11. This body of work is, I can see elements in here from that time because I was a sign painter, and it was graphic design. Text was kind of always in my world, and I was really interested in font and just how you can use it as a textural background to things. So there's a lot of found objects in the jewelry because I was really interested in those things too, but the found objects carried text. And so I was incorporating them into some of these pieces. And the work that I was doing back then was my artwork. And jewelry is artwork. And you can tell a story through jewelry. You can fulfill a narrative through the jewelry. I don't remember what the stories are behind these pieces necessarily. It's been too long. But you can see it in the work. You know, there are elements, there's kind of little nuggets of truth that are kind of peeking out and giving you an insight as to something else is happening behind the work. They also kind of feel like the mountains to me because they're kind of rugged. There's some rusty elements in there. There's natural rock in some of these pieces. And they just have that kind of flavor. It feels like, you know, I'm coming right off of living in the mountains. And of course, I see that. I don't know that other people would see that, but I know the time frame for these pieces. And so because I was sort of looking at found objects and incorporating found objects into the work, inevitably, this question came up earlier today from a student. You know, when you use found objects, do you just like have a whole library of stuff, like boxes and bins full of stuff? Yes and no. But back then, when I was starting to kind of curate my own body of found objects, I did. I had a lot of stuff. And inevitably, if you're a jewelry designer, the gallery for jewelry is on the body. Okay, so we're wearing the pieces on the body. So they have to be a lot of different things. They've got to be ergonomic. They've got to be comfortable. And this isn't always the case. I'm kind of painting a broad stroke here. But we've got to think like engineers. We've got to think like industrial designers because there's a lot of mechanisms and movement in the work. And so inevitably, though, you're going to be collecting found objects that are maybe too big to fit into a piece of jewelry. And I did that. I collected things, and I would want to incorporate something, but it just would feel really big and kind of crazy for me, you know. And the scope of jewelry goes from very small, fine jewelry, lots of diamonds and encrusted and beautiful and just, you know, high carat materials, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is very sculptural body sculpture. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle to the art side of things. I'm still interested in making wearable pieces. But they're bigger wearable pieces. If you've been down in the gallery, you see it, and you know. So I gave myself permission one day to start working larger, beyond the scope of jewelry. And so this was the first piece that I made. And these next few images are kind of like this Joseph Cornell shadow box kind of idea. I love Joseph Cornell's work, and so I was, I'm not afraid to say that I was ripping him off. But I was incorporating some of these jewelry elements that just never made it into a piece. You make things and you might find its way into a piece, or maybe it's just kind of set aside waiting for its day. And so this piece was liberating because it felt so big. and it was like 7 inches by 5 inches. But as a pendant, that's a honkin' pendant. But it was so liberating because I was freed from the bounds of like having to work within the parameters of what can fit on the body. So I started working in this way. And so some of these pieces are, from that era. But there's always this kind of nautical tie in this sculptural work that is kind of a through line in everything. And now that you know that I'm a sailor, you can go back down into the gallery and all of a sudden you can see it. It's a through line through everything. So I'm playing with ideas of navigation. The mechanisms on a sailboat are fascinating. Just the way that you make this vessel, function. It's a kinetic, interactive piece of sculpture, just like the pieces I have down in the gallery. So that's where the tie really comes in. And so I'm going to kind of bounce through a couple of these images. I've got so many images here. I'm going to not talk about every single one, and I'll just kind of scroll through. But there's quite often a horizon line that you'll see in these pieces. They're kind of landscapey, but they're very much, assemblage pieces. And there's always, not always, but there's often this kind of through line of text kind of happening. And whether the text actually says something or not, it's kind of it's a throwback to my sign making days. And so you'll see these common elements just keep appearing in the work. So I talked about, the sailboats and just the kinetic aspect of a sailboat. If you've ever sailed, there are lots of lines and ropes on a sailboat that help harness sails and harness the energy to make the vessel move. And on bigger boats, you use winches to gain mechanical advantage to harness, to pull these lines and ropes in. And so rotational movement became something that I became interested in. And trying to turn these wall sculptures into something more kinetic and more interactive was what I was really kind of shooting for. And so this is actually the mechanism that drives the big piece in the middle of the gallery down there. This is a close-up of it in its very early stages. This was a test run just to see if I could make all of these kind of marionette-like strings function as it comes to this central hub and this one pin that drives the system. So this is just using that rotational movement that translates into linear movement, which then drives a whole system. And so that's where my mindset was going. And this is all coming from a sailboat. Kind of crazy. And so these pieces got a little more mechanical, still relatively simple. This particular piece has a little crank in the middle. And when you turn that crank, it pulls a line, feeds a line onto a spindle. These are typewriter parts, so I tore apart an old typewriter and kind of repurposed the innards. And you turn that crank, it's a super simple thing, but it pulls the line, lifts the little teeter-totter construction, and the ball rolls to one side. And the idea behind this ball rolling concept, it just keeps coming back in my work. And it's a very simple nod to like getting from point A to point B. And sailing it's about the process of getting places. It's not about just getting to the destination, because there's so much work that goes into moving a sailboat and getting the boat to move in the direction you want. So that's where this idea behind the ball rolling from one side to the other comes from. A lot of horizon lines. I spent a lot of time drawing the shore. So you see a lot of landscapes and shorelines in these pieces. And again, these are very early constructions. Some of them are, there's a very obvious reference to that typical sailboat kind of triangular shape. And then, more found objects start to appear. This hand crank concept with the old hand drills, just repurposing a hand drill and moving the knob from the big round gear that's in the middle and putting it out into the chuck completely changes the way you can function this hand drill. And it can drive a system. And so it's a little hard to see here, but these are paper airplanes. And when you turn the crank, they actually flap their wings. This piece actually won a blue ribbon at the State Fair in the Fine Arts show. And it's sold too. Bonus. The pieces start, as we go along, they get more and more elaborate and bigger. But still, you're seeing the same basic construct of water, shoreline, text, rolling ball kind of thing happening inside here. Some of them are interactive, where you're actually physically manipulating the piece. Others are motor driven. So this piece is a motorized piece. And they're getting bigger, and they're starting to kind of spread out. Not a kinetic piece, but a pretty good sized piece. And this was actually, the wooden panel in the back was a dagger board from a sailboat that my friend's dad started building when he was in high school. And he never finished it. It sat in his garage forever. And when he was transitioning from his home to an assisted living facility, he asked if I would take this boat that he started building 60 years ago or more. And he wanted me to finish it. And he had the parts. This is one of the parts that never made it into the boat. And it was so far rotted that it broke my heart to just take it and know that I was never going to finish it. But I turned the parts into sculpture. And so this piece is, it's not necessarily in homage to him, but I feel like it kind of it furthers his legacy, because I'm still using his work and the things that he wanted to see move on into a different life. This piece is called Weather Vane. All of those letters that you see, I cut those up by hand with a jeweler saw. All right, so I'm also a jeweler, so I don't want to forget about that. And so as the sculpture starts kind of evolving, the jewelry is also evolving. And I'm working on these things fairly simultaneously. And they get more complex. And so this is a bracelet that is hinged. So all of these individual components, I was just kind of making individual components, not really thinking about the composition yet. I was just kind of making the elements. And then knowing that I could hinge them together with this very mechanical kind of hinge. And that mechanical hinge is the commonality through the piece that allows you to put all of these very disparate kind of parts together and have it be cohesive. So this is one of those pieces. That boat-like shape in the middle, absolute nod to sailing and canoes and boats and those kinds of things. And so I made a number of these big kind of chunky sculptural bracelets. This one happens to have a magnet clasp. That's a big industrial magnet in the middle there in the front, and they just snap together. It's really satisfying when that closes and locks down. Another in that vein, another big hinge bracelet, using wood and rusty metal. The materials that I choose, I have a tendency to let them be themselves and not paint them necessarily or color them. Maybe I'll stain something. With metal, we'll oxidize it to kind of, we're using metalsmithing techniques. But I was a big fan of letting the materials be themselves, and there's a truth in materials concept there. So here we're using purple heart and rosewood and ebony, piece of rusty metal that I found on the ground. That's the text in there was an old ruler and antique rulers. I don't know if we call them antique anymore, but the antique rulers on the back sides quite often had the advertising. They were things that businesses would give away. And so this was some advertising on the back. So again, text is still playing a role. This piece, though, I want you to really soak it in, because the design, the construction of this is a bracelet, leads into this next piece that I'm going to show you. This is my first commission piece that I was ever commissioned by any kind of businesses. This happened to be a business that was a parent company to 65 smaller businesses. And it was a construction company. And they built big things like stadiums and skyscrapers and factories. So they had all of these smaller companies underneath the umbrella of this one big company. And they hired me to go to some of the local companies and just pilfer stuff. Like I could go and just collect things from those businesses and incorporate it into a piece of artwork that kind of tells the story of their business. But I just want to bounce back and forth between just the design of this piece, this bracelet, and this, wall sculpture. This was not intentional, but they were absolutely happening at the same time, the same era. And I can, you can just see this design, this kind of through line that's happening. And I didn't notice this until I was putting, a slideshow together. Not this slideshow, I knew about this before. But putting something together, I'm like, wow, those two pieces are really tied together. And I can see that time frame. This piece, though, is a piece called Mechanical Migration for that company. And like I said, it tells the story of their company. And so I got to go around and just grab stuff from their businesses. And so those little flower heads, those are sprinkler heads, like the overhead sprinklers. They had a fire suppression systems company that's what they did. The chain going through here, they had a garage door company. So the chain and all of the gears came from the garage door company. Those are blueprints on those acrylic panels that are kind of a through line. So I got to go to their engineering firm and grab their blueprints and make copies. The gauges and the gears and the plumbing, they had a plumbing company. That big red wheel is a wheel that turns valves, so that you can turn the water systems on or whatever. I don't even know what it was from, but I got to just take all of this stuff and use it in this piece. And so it is an interactive piece. So see these little birds that are just kind of soaring back and forth? I couldn't make them flap their wings because it was a solid piece, but I got to go to their foundry. They owned a foundry, and they made all of the metal parts to build whatever it was that they were building. And those are pieces of angle iron. And if you know what angle iron is, it's this kind of L-shaped piece of bar that they had a machine that cuts their angle iron to length. And rather than just being like a saw blade that comes down and cuts the piece in two, it actually cuts a slice out, and in doing that, it folds those legs out into this like very perfect child kindergartner, drawn birds. And the moment I saw those things, I knew exactly what this piece was going to do. I was going to turn those things into some kind of mechanical puppetry to make them move. They're just soaring. It's silly, but it was so much fun to make, and they loved it. And this is where it lives. It's on the wall on the left side there. This is like straight out of Star Trek. It's a cool, I felt really bad drilling holes in those walls. But again, these are like the little sprinkler heads. And they're made out of bronze, and I could start to use those things in jewelry. So again, kind of taking those things and pushing and pulling, where can I implement those funky little things, and how can I use them? You can solder to them, you can do all kinds of stuff with them. So they were a lot of fun. This is a piece called Wave Pattern Simulator. And the boat is something that I made. I didn't really intend for it to go in here, but I started thinking about simulating wave patterns. And the piece is not about the boat, it's about this mechanism down here. So it's a motor-driven mechanism that lifts and drops these push rods that move up and down. There are lines attached to the end of those push rods that then go over and drive these rods up and down. And it's a 3-point connection under the boat. And it's easy to make something hobby horse back and forth with 2 push rods going up and down. You add the third one, and now you can make it gyrate. And that's what I was trying to do here. It's all about making that motion happen. And being a sailor, being on a boat, you're kind of constantly doing this kind of gyrating motion. And I wanted to mimic that. And so this piece was all about just creating that gyrating effect. All right, and then this piece is down in the gallery. 3 dinghies. Hopefully you've had a chance to interact with it. Again, this is one that is just creating this rolling wave kind of pattern underneath these little paper boats. And making this hand crank, building this contraption was so much fun. And once you get one, you figure out how to make that one of those levers just move up and down by turning the crank to make that wheel go around, and it's on the pin, and you figure that out. and then amplify it by 6, or however many of those there are. That little mechanism, if you haven't seen it, go down and play with that thing, because that little mechanism right there in the middle is so much fun to watch, because it's like this little kind of flower that opens up. But it's amazing how this kind of wave kind of rolls underneath these boats. And so there's that. I do paint a little bit. And so I did do those paintings. As much as a hack as I was as a graphic designer, I'm a hack painter too. But I can paint sky, I can paint water, and I can paint a horizon line. And trees, I can do trees. Okay, so that's kind of this early body of work kind of coming out of moving back here. I said that I have 2 of these moments in my life where the trajectory of my career completely takes a turn. I think this was back around 2011, maybe, somewhere in there. Twin Cities Public Television contacted me and said, we've got a program that we're working on. We haven't filmed an episode yet, but we're spotlighting Minneapolis artists or Minnesota artists. And they asked if they could come interview me. And this was their first season. They didn't even know what the show was going to look like. And so I was really hesitant, because I wanted to know, are you going to make me look like a fool? Are you going to make me look good? What's this going to be? And I don't love being interviewed. I don't love doing this necessarily, talking in front of all of you. It's not my favorite thing to do. It's probably the scariest thing I'll do all year. But I'm actually enjoying it. But so they contacted me and they said, yeah, can we come interview you? And my wife, I talked to my wife about it, and I almost said no. And she said, no, you're totally going to do that. She's a high school art teacher and an artist herself. She's like, it would be stupid not to do it. So I agreed. And they came to my house. At that time, we lived up in Robbinsdale, and we had a studio in our garage. And so that's my garage there. And the garage was 3 car stalls wide, and then it had a little extension in the front. So we had this big kind of L-shaped studio, 1 car stall, and then the extension in the front. And I was a little embarrassed to say, yeah, come to my garage studio and interview me for this TV show. But they did. And the TV program was called Minnesota Original. And I don't know if it's still going, but for many years they ran this program. And you can go to their website, and they've got hundreds of interviews with Minnesota artists, and they're fantastic. They're so good. And they made me look really good, even though I wasn't dressed for this. I don't know what I was thinking. Here's just a clip from that. I'm just wearing this ratty fleece jacket, a ratty black t-shirt, same stupid hat that I'm wearing right now. And I look a little younger though. That's the bonus. But I didn't know what I was doing. But they made me look really good. And the reason that I bring this up is because this is that second trajectory shift. I was contacted, after the segment aired, I was contacted by a woman, the ceramics professor. She was the ceramics and metalsmithing professor at Carleton College. And she said, hey, I saw your Minnesota Original segment. I think we should be friends. And why don't you come down here and talk to my students, and I'll take you out to lunch. Maybe you can give an artist talk. And again, I was like, oh God, I don't like giving artist talks. And my wife was like, yeah, you have to do this. And so I agreed to do it. And Kelly Canole, who is my collaborator down in the Furlong, that big piece in the middle, she's the one that contacted me. And we did the demo in her class exactly like we did today, Masako. Demo, talked to students, kind of walked through their workshops or their studio spaces and talked to them, gave an artist talk. She took me out to lunch and she said, have you ever thought about teaching? And little did I know, this was a job interview. She said, every now and then I'm on sabbatical and the metalsmithing classes just go nobody's teaching them. We'd like to keep that filled. Would you consider teaching a class? So then again, I'm like, okay, give me a time to think about this. I go back and talk to my wife, and she's like, yeah, you're gonna do this. It would be stupid not to. And I'm like, God, I am not a teacher. I had no ambitions to teach at all. That was not even on the radar for me, just like the sailboat. But I reluctantly agreed, and I hacked my way through the first year. My wife helped me write, assignments and those kinds of things. And so I hacked my way through, and they said, the next year they said, how'd you like to teach another class? So I did it. And then that turned into 2 classes the following year. And then all of a sudden they said, well, how'd you like to become, they call it FOCA down there, faculty on continuing appointment. They don't do adjuncts. They make you faculty. So I am now a faculty member at Carleton. I fell ass backwards into teaching. Just coming from a place of privilege, I've said this earlier today too, that doesn't happen very often, but I am so grateful for that opportunity. And I've been given the metalsmithing classes. So Kelly no longer teaches them. It's my domain. And just saying yes to things is scary. But following these little paths as they open up for you, this was a choice. I didn't have to do this, but I am so, so thankful, because what it does for me is it opens up a whole new line of thinking and the way that I started creating artwork. I no longer was thinking about things in a way that I had to, when I was working as just a jewelry designer, making sculpture, I was trying to sell those things. And once you have kind of a foundation that you can kind of fall back on, the way that you design sculpture or jewelry kind of frees up a little bit, because you're not so worried about selling anymore. Not that I don't love selling work, but I'm not out there actively hustling as much. And being an artist is a hustle, especially in the beginning, getting noticed by galleries, getting people to see your work. You've got to be scrappy and you've got to hustle. And that's not something that they necessarily teach in college. You probably all do, all you professors out there. But it's just one of those things that is kind of like that underlying thing. You got to figure out how to get your work out there and get shown and sell. But it freed up a new kind of type of work that I was producing. I was starting to think more three-dimensionally, more fully in the round. Three-dimensional sculpture is a hard sell. Because how do people live with these things? They're not necessarily going to put a big statue in the middle of their living room. But I started making more three-dimensional things, and I was starting to think more towards bigger entities like corporations. After I got that first commission, I could maybe start to kind of gear towards those entities that might have bigger budgets and can kind of house these kinds of things. So this is one of the first sculptures that I started making in this, after that program came out and then I started teaching. Illuminated, kinetic, those moths, they don't fly around the thing, but they do flap their wings, and those are made of porcelain. And Kelly, my collaborator, made those little porcelain wings for me. So we've started collaborating really early on. Not that this was a collaboration, I just kind of asked her to make them for me, but I kind of feel like this is the start of our collaboration. But this is a pendant sculpture, so it hangs, it suspends. And then again, not to forget about jewelry, this is a bracelet working in kind of that same time frame. I bring this one up because those plate tectonic kind of things on the top remind me of those kites or those sails on these sculptures. And so again, I'm kind of like seeing these little elements that are kind of a through line because of the time frame. This piece is pretty big. It stands probably, 4.5 feet tall. And I don't know, it's maybe 3.5 to 4 feet around. So they get pretty big, but they're suspended, illuminated pieces. This one actually has a disco ball inside, these little mini disco ball that spins. And so it casts these really great little patterns on that gauzy fabric that you see around there. And so that led into this show that I did. This was my first collaborative show with Kelly. I was given a show. The gallery was bigger than I felt I could fill, so I asked her to partner with me. And so we had our first show together. And so I created these kind of Zeppelin-like structures, and I wanted to create a fleet of them. I was thinking of them as like this Air Force. They're pointed on both ends. They're kinetic. They're kind of sailboat-esque. There's those sails and those kites, but they're also real sci-fi feeling. And each of them has a specific duty. They all have like their own superpower. One here that I'm going to show you, this one is it's almost like a tall ship in a way, but it also has these bombs that kind of drop out of the belly, and they do kind of rise and fall. And they're old antique darts that I found someplace, and they drop into test tubes that are filled with this red liquid, which is actually transmission fluid. It doesn't evaporate, so it's nice so they drop into these little test tubes, and they clink as they go into the test tubes. So they make noise, and it's just lovely. But they kind of look like hummingbirds, kind of dropping in and kind of feeding. And those little copper, it's hard to see, but those little copper embellishments around the test tube, it looks like a flower, but it also looks like a mushroom cloud. So, and that's very intentional. And so I wanted these things, I was infatuated with this, making these structures and really giving them this ambiguity. I didn't want people to think that they were a force for good or a force for evil. They were kind of neutral, and I kind of loved that about it. And they were all hung right at eye level, right in this level. So you could walk up to them and look into them and peer into them and kind of see all the mechanisms that were moving inside. Next piece is a piece of jewelry, but look at the structure, the base structure of this thing, that kind of elliptical pointed thing starts appearing. It's kind of that boat shape that I pointed out earlier, but this repetitive kind of shape with these hinge mechanisms harkening back to those bracelets. Still working on jewelry, repeated elements, and then this is just another one of those pieces. The title of this piece, this is really cute. It's called Dick Cheney's Disco Warship. And Dick Cheney was a dude a while ago, vice president under George Bush, second Bush. And he was like this Darth Vader-like character that we all thought was so evil. Well, I don't want to talk politics too much, but we all thought that he had this presence, right? And it seems really cute right now. I mean, it's so, I don't know. He was kind of a warmonger. And so this Dick Cheney's Disco Warship got the notice of somebody at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, and they commissioned me to do 24 of these things. They didn't know the title was Dick Cheney's Disco Warship. But I made 24 of these things, not kinetic, but they are illuminated. Each one of them has a disco ball inside. I've bought more disco balls than anybody should. And the disco ball is just there to scatter the light. You can't see the disco ball, but it's just the lights are on the ends, and they shine in, and then the disco ball scatters the light back. So you get these little pinpoints of light, and I think you can see it here in the middle. So that's the pattern that you get. This one actually does rotate, which is cool. Makes me want to go roller skating. But all of these don't move, but each of the kite patterns or the sail patterns on top is completely unique. So I had to design 24 unique sail patterns for these things. And this was a brand new concourse at the Humphrey Terminal. And I was given a space 100 feet long by 25 feet wide to fill. And that's a daunting amount of space. So I decided to just make a lot of little things. And each of these things is about this big, so they're not small. But what was really funny was bringing them in to the airport. We're carrying these things two at a time, like luggage, and they look like bombs. We're walking right through security with these things. Got a lot of funny looks. But I got to design the whole hanging structure. All of that was, they didn't know how to hang it, so I had to design the hanging mechanism, suspend all of these things from that. We had people that went up and did the actual installation, but I was down wiring everything. And it's really hard to capture a 100-foot long, run of these things. So that's just a panorama. This next piece is tied to the piece down in the gallery. I started getting interested in, Lake Superior. Always interested in Lake Superior, but I started thinking about climate change, as one does. And we all have these images of climate change and glaciers melting and polar bears losing their habitat and all of that. I was interested in trying to start making, or at least make one piece where I can bring this idea of climate change closer to home. So I started thinking about how is ice formation on Lake Superior being affected by climate change? And I came up with this concept, and I knew that this wasn't something that, it was going to cost some money to build. It was going to take time, and I decided to apply for a state arts board grant, a Minnesota State Arts Board grant, to fund this project. And I've applied for grants in the past, and if you've ever tried applying for a grant, they're a pain in the butt. But I finally cracked the code on this one, and they funded this project. And it allowed me to go and interview researchers at the Large Lakes Observatory up in Duluth, and just talk to them about how, what are they seeing, and how is climate change changing the shoreline and ice formation? Are we seeing more? Are we seeing less? Of course, we're seeing less. But I designed a piece around this idea of ice breaking up on Lake Superior. And so this is that piece. And the motor in the middle is that same motor that drives the system downstairs. Those towers are reconfigured. So I repurposed this piece for that one downstairs. But this was the first iteration. So this is where all of the mechanism came from. And going back to that sailboat piece that creates the gyrating effect, the same thing is happening here. So I took what I've learned from that piece and applied it to this. So there are 3 push rods coming up and pushing on these ice pieces that creates this gyrating kind of effect, like water is kind of rolling underneath these pieces. Again, illuminated, again, disco balls, creating that splattering of light that you see in those pieces. And you can actually see a disco ball in shadow every now and then, like on the very back one. In the back, you can see a round ball. But this boat was something I also built. And I didn't intend for it to be part of the sculpture. But I was building it, and as I was making the sculpture too, it just seemed really obvious to pair the two together. And the boat for me is kind of, when I'm making sculpture, making artwork, whatever, I never put the human figure in. It's just not something I'm good at. I just don't do it enough. But I'm always implying human activity, and the boat is that implication of human activity. And the boat is actually suspended from the ceiling and hovering in the space. And it's static, it's not moving, but the waves are all moving around it. And that boat is right down at waterline, if you can imagine where the waterline is for the ice. So it's almost like it's underwater, like it's like the water levels are rising or whatever, however you want to infer that. But it was my way of saying, like, okay, if humans don't do something, we're in trouble because the boat's not moving. And if we don't move, if we don't make that boat rock and start doing something, we could be in trouble. So this is that piece just in the daytime. Lower angle so you can kind of see the structures underneath. You can see the disco balls too. And I showed this piece for the first time in the Grammar Art Colony up on Lake Superior. And it was very important to me to have this shown for the very first time in a town right next to Lake Superior in the middle of February when nobody was going to see it because it's February and it's a tourist town and not many people go to Grand Marais in February, but I did deliver it. And this is that boat. It's actually a functioning sailboat. And I was not prepared when I first put this boat in the water to see the water as clearly as you can through the bottom of that hull. It floored me, and it is just so fascinating. It's called a skin-on-frame boat, and so it's made of fabric and wood structure. But those Zeppelin shapes, those are made in the same form. The very linear kind of structures and the fabric that gets stretched tight over the structure. It's all the same thing. So I'm using this technology of this skin-on-frame boat to build these other structures. Those ice pieces are built in the same way. So that's Lake Harriet. And this is that piece at the American Swedish Institute in Minneapolis. I get to put it in this gorgeous room. This is a spectacular room to have a sculpture. And going from the other angle, they had a stage on one side with a screen, and we could project. We just shot some quick video of waves lapping on the shore of Lake Superior. It seemed obvious that we should do that. back to jewelry. Jewelry where climate change is part of the theme. These are some pendants, bracelets, different things, where like one side is this metal that is got this very textural metal component, kind of looks like a topographic map. And the other side is this optical quartz, which is kind of the ice portion of climate change land thing happening here. And those two cables are being like holding the ice back. It's like where, people are kind of like trying to keep the ice from breaking away. And these pieces were part of a show that were all about, the show was about incorporating text into jewelry. And so these pieces had text under the ice. And I don't have an image of that first one, but this is a bracelet. And under the ice, I cut it out with a jeweler's saw. It says, "You make me melt." And the whole idea was this kind of like cheesy double entendre. It's like the ice is telling the land mass that you're making me melt. But it's also something, it's like a term of endearment if you're giving a piece of jewelry to somebody. You make me melt. You're my favorite person in the world. Kind of corny, but it was fun. Okay, we got to be wrapping up. I'm getting a little long-winded here. A couple of just other things, though. This piece, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this piece, other than the fact that these panels, these green and rusty panels, came from my childhood swimming pool. My parents had an above-ground pool that they sank 2 feet in the ground, halfway in the ground. And there's a rubber liner that fills, that covers the metal band that creates the pool. And after 15, 20 years of being in the ground, it started rusting, and I went over to help my dad. We put a new pool in, and we took the rubber liner out, and all the way around me, 360 degrees around me, was this rusty metal. And it was gorgeous. And my dad's like, "Oh, look at that. I could kick my foot through it." I'm like, "No, I want it. I want to take it." So I took it. I took the whole damn thing. And I started making artwork with it. And this piece, I'm not going to talk about it in particular other than just that's what that is. I got an email. So we're just going to read it together. "Hello, Danny. I'm an interior designer and really love your 3D industrial art. I'm due restaurant and I selected your art for one of our projects. Can you custom pieces for a project? Do you have something for sale? Let me know as soon as possible. Thank you." Would you have responded to this? I got one of these emails, trashed it. I don't know, 3 weeks later, got another one, trashed it. I got maybe 3 or 4 of these emails. And finally, I just responded. I said, "What are you looking for?" And this woman contacted me right back. And she said, "Oh, I'm an interior designer," broken English, but kind of laid out what she's looking for. I'm like, this is a scam. There's no way. And so we corresponded for like 3 or 4 days, back and forth, 5, 6, 7 emails. And I'm just like, where's the scam? When is the scam happening? And it wasn't a scam. The first email that she sent me was for a project. I mean, she's an interior designer for a big company down in Miami. She's from Columbia. And her English is fairly broken. She just needs an assistant to write her emails for her. Because the first project that she was asking me about was for the Marina Bay Sands Hotel in Singapore. And I threw that email away. I don't know how many, we went back and forth, those emails kept coming. And it was probably 2 or 3 months. But she did commission me for a job. This project, this is in a restaurant. It's really crappy lighting, so it's really hard to see. But she was designing the restaurant in Beverly Hills. And so I got this big wall to fill. And it had kind of a look and an aesthetic, so we went back and forth on design, came up with the design, and I drove it out there, filled a U-Haul with all of this stuff, and drove it out there. And these panels are 6 feet tall, and I think the whole thing is like 18 feet wide, 20 feet, somewhere in there. And you can see that swimming pool, the rusty metal swimming pool, that green at the top, that's what that is. And here I am. It was an 11-hour install. We started at 11 o'clock at night and went all night long and finished up around 10 in the morning. And so this is that piece. Yeah. Damn Singapore. That would have been fun. Okay, so just a couple of other pieces of jewelry, and we're going to wrap things up. Not going to talk about them all, but I'm just looking at this frenetic energy kind of happening at the top here. I started building these kind of steam-bent wood structures, thinking about lighting, kind of thinking about industrial design, and just pendant light kind of concepts. More of this jewelry kind of playing with this idea of a lot of little pieces, that same boat-like shape appearing again. This is a sculpture that I was commissioned to make based upon those smaller pieces. Here is a kind of a close-up. And here it is on the top of my truck. You gotta move these things. You gotta get them to where they gotta go. And so I was commissioned to do this. This is Sculpture Cam. Driving it to Hopkins. The city of Hopkins commissioned me to make this piece. They built this new atrium for their city hall. And so it was a big glass atrium, and they needed something up in their atrium. And so I was commissioned to build this piece, and it was based upon their mission statement, which is all about community and fostering growth and all of this. And so I made some cheesy statement saying like, all of these individual strips of wood are like community members, and we're all doing our own thing, but we come together as one big, a big mass. Yeah, I know. That's exactly it. So I mean, I said what I had to say to get the commission. So there it is. Here it is inside that atrium. So it hangs above you as you come in. Okay, again, trying to go faster. The pieces that are down in the gallery, these pieces are my COVID work. Okay, and these are very different for me. And what was happening is, we were also siloed during COVID, and I was working in my studio, and I decided to silo myself, not like I couldn't leave, but I didn't want to bring in new materials to work with. I decided to just work with the things that I had around me, and I have a lot of scraps and a lot of scrap wood, and so I just decided to pilfer through my scrap bins and just start composing using scraps and see where those could take me. And signage still kind of coming into play. This is not too long ago, it's just a couple years ago, but I'm still kind of fascinated by signage. And so I was just playing around with these very, traffic-like signs. I don't even know what this means. It doesn't mean anything. It means I was bored during COVID. But I was still, working with composition. Another one that was just purely about composition. The thing that I was playing with, though, more than ever before, was color. I'm not that good with color. I let the materials be themselves. And here I was like, okay, let's just force this a little bit and let's play with color a little bit more. And sign paints are really bold, bright colors. And so I think that's sort of coming in here, and that's why I'm so drawn to traffic signs, because they're bold. And so you're starting to see kind of this traffic thing happening. Maybe it's because we weren't driving as much, I don't know. And so these are just kind of from that era. And then I started making jewelry with the same intent. We're just using materials that were around me. I gave myself permission to use wood instead of metal in the jewelry. So most of these pieces that are in the display case down there are made of wood with elements of metal in them, but a lot of the structure is wood, which allowed me to glue things together, which glue is a no-no in my world of metalsmithing anyway. We chemically bond things maybe, but we never glue them together. And so I gave myself permission to use glue. I painted them. I was breaking all the rules, all of the rules that I set out for myself. Now, they're not your rules. And all of you metalsmiths out there, they don't have to be your rules. These are the ones that I ascribe to. But so these are just kind of from that era. This is the piece that's down there. Tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That black panel in the background is exactly as tall as she was. She was 5'1". So that's the reason that it's hung in the gallery low, because the piece is actually maybe right about this high. So the panel is quite low, but I wanted that impact of how tall she was. Monumental figure in our history, but she was a very small person in real life. So this piece is called Keeping Time, and this is the piece that's down in the gallery. This piece has gone through several iterations. that same mechanism from the sculpture with the boat and all the icebergs. It's the same mechanism. We just repurposed it. Kelly Knoll is the collaborator, the woman that brought me into Carleton. And she's a ceramics professor, and she's a ceramics sculptor. She does throw pots, but she's more of a sculptor. And so she had a show that she was part of, that she was asked to do, and just like I had a show a long time ago and I asked her to partner with me, she did the same thing. She's like, I don't know that I have enough work to fill this gallery space, would you like to partner? And so I agreed to do that, and we decided to do this one piece. And we were really thinking about, like we were brainstorming, trying to figure out what would this piece be. I'm like, okay, I've got this mechanism that I know I can reconfigure and make work in another format. How can we make that work? What was I thinking about with this piece? I was thinking about climate change. Okay, so Kelly was like, yeah, climate change isn't something that I'm like interested in working towards, totally interested in it, but I'm not like thinking about it in the artwork. She was thinking about blood cells. Yeah, so at the bottom of these things, we needed weight to anchor these things, and just so that the mechanism doesn't just pull all those strings and all of those towers together. So you gotta have weight in the base of those things. So form follows function. We gotta fill them with something. She was thinking about blood, and blood was not resonating with me, but I'm like, well, she was like, I wanna make these red and white blood cells. And the white is porcelain, the red blood cells are clay from the Arboretum down at Carleton. So they're harvesting the clay. And so it was about place for her. But she was also thinking about blood in a way that, you know, not about the liquid in our bodies, but blood relations. She has 2 kids that are her adopted kids, but she is their mom. I have 2 stepchildren, and I am their dad. They call me dad. So we have that in common. We have a lot of things in common, which is why she thought we needed to be friends. But she was thinking about blood and blood relations, and she was also on a search committee for a Native American Studies person down at Carleton. She was thinking about blood quantum and those kinds of things. So there was a lot of blood kind of in her head that she was just trying to suss out. And I was just like, yeah, that's just not resonating with me. So I said, well, okay, I do this rolling ball thing. I can reconfigure the top to not have the ice, but to do this rolling ball idea. And so I'm like, that I can do. I know how to do that. And she's like, okay, well that, you know, as we started building that, it started sounding like a clock. And so then it was like, okay, time. How can time kind of work its way in? And she's still thinking blood. And about halfway through building this piece, blood still wasn't resonating with me, and we were still not sure what this was going to be. But my son contracted endocarditis, which, if you know what endocarditis is, it's a bacterial infection of the blood, and it's treatable if you catch it early, but they didn't catch it. And he went a month and a half with this bacteria eating his heart. And 2 of his valves were completely gone. And when they finally caught it, the doctor came to me and he said, he was my age, he said, if it was you or I, we'd be dead. There's no way that he should be living. And they rushed him into the ER. And he had open heart surgery, had 2 mechanical valves put in his heart, and they rebuilt part of the wall of his heart. The doctors came out and said, quadruple bypass surgery is a 2 on the scale. This is a 10. It doesn't get any harder than this. This was 2 years ago. He's still with us. He almost didn't make it. But all of a sudden, this piece had so much meaning. That motor that drives the system is like a heart. The arcs are keeping time. The crows are just bearing witness. And Kelly is the one that, she does a lot with animals and crows, rabbits, all kinds of different things. But she was trying to find a way to incorporate the crows, and all of a sudden everything just fell into place. And that doesn't happen very often, but for this piece it really did. And this is a piece that I said, it's sort of we keep tweaking it. In this gallery space here, you can see that the towers are much lower down in the gallery here, we added 16 inches on. So we didn't like how everything was just at eye level. All the arcs were at eye level. So we added to it, and we brought them up above human height because it just felt more important, more monumental that way. So we're constantly tweaking this piece, and we just keep finding places to show it. And this is a powerful piece for me. Every time I do it, when I'm practicing in my studio to do this talk, I get choked up every single time. So, and that's what art can do. I mean, it's powerful what we do. We're like wizards. We can make ourselves cry. It's great. Here it is in the gallery space, and I'll just leave it at that. Thanks, everybody.